Marcus and Dianne, thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Thank you for having us.
No, this is a pleasure. So before we get into the main topics, talk a little bit about yourselves. How did you all meet, and were you raised Catholic, or is that something that you found later in life?
Yeah, you want to start?
Sure. I was a cradle Catholic, and I grew up in a home with three other siblings, and my parents did a really good job instilling the faith in us, and I would say, they were pretty devout Catholics. But as far as our individual faith life went, I felt just a little bit more of an interior growth growing up. My parents weren't exactly comfortable, being vulnerable with us. So even though I knew that they had a very, deep prayer life, and obviously they passed on the faith to us, it wasn't something that I felt I could really share with them on a personal level. So that was really something that that grew more when I became a teenager and teenager and young adult.
What about yourself?
I was born or baptized Catholic when I was a baby, but we went to church for an hour on Sunday, and outside of church, we didn't really have much of a faith. Luckily had parents who loved me very much, but it was just not. It was not a thing that we really discussed or really practiced again outside of Sundays. So I didn't really know much about the faith growing up. It wasn't a thing that was really on my radar. I was about sports, games, and girls and those kinds of things, and so it wasn't until college when I met Dianne that I actually began to understand more about the faith and began practicing it.
Where did y'all go to school?
UTSA, University of Texas at San Antonio, Roadrunners.
Very good. Now, you all, how long have you been married?
8 years.
And you have children?
We have 4. Yep,
4.
2 boys and 2 girls.
What are the ages?
7, 6, 3, and 2 as of yesterday.
So when you get into the 3s and 4, that's when you start trying to remember the ages.
Yeah.
Because they're always shifting out of one and into another.
Yes.
Well, it's
And
easy
each phase
for
is
us because
unique.
they're basically like a year apart. So if you get one right, you can get
You just got to start off strong, and then it just follows down the line. So you all have a website and a ministry dedicated to helping young people thoroughly live out the Catholic faith. Talk a little bit about what that ministry is and why you got started in it.
It's hard to describe without sharing some of our story, which I know we'll go into, but we'll just sort of take that for granted right now. When I met Dianne, like I said, I didn't really have much of a faith before that. But when I met her, I was introduced to the theology of the body.
Right.
And when I got a hold of the theology of the body, it really rocked my world. I had never heard anything like that before, not just from the Catholic Church, but anywhere. It was something that I always knew that I needed and I was searching for, but I didn't really know that I was really looking for something until I found it. And when I found it, I just couldn't get enough. So I read every book I could find. I started going to conferences and listening to audio talks and those kinds of things. And when I started to learn more about my faith, my first reaction, kind of like when you see a really good movie, is I gotta tell somebody about this.
Right.
I gotta share it with somebody, because even a great movie is not really fun if you're the only person who's ever seen it. So I started sharing it. I started talking kind of just one-on-one with coworkers and friends. And my family. I started telling them, how they needed to change their life and that kind of thing.
I'm sure they love that.
Yeah. Anyway, so I obviously I went through some stages of my ministry. At the very beginning, I was kind of gung ho. But anyway, I felt very strongly that I needed to share it, and so as I was sharing individually, and I started to kind of share at some retreats and youth groups and those kinds of things. I got requests to speak, and I thought, well, I'd like to develop something a little more formal, because maybe I can share my story outside of just my local circle. And so I made a YouTube video of our story, and it exploded almost overnight. Within a couple of days, it started to reach all over the nation. I had people contacting me from different countries who wanted to take the story and translate it into their own language. And we now have, including English, 5 different languages that with subtitles, were of this story, and as I started to, see that there was opportunity there to grow the ministry, and I was receiving invitations to speak outside of my city and state. I realized that I wanted to do something a little more formal, so I created Thirsting for Truth as a way to. I was already blogging at that time, but as a way to kind of formalize my efforts to really evangelize and put what I felt God had given me to share into a couple of different formats like podcasting.
Right. So what's the URL?
Thirstingfortruth.com.
Thirsting for Truth.
Thirsting, THIRSTING, and then it's FOR, not like the 90s for. It's spelled out, and then truth.com.
Very good. And Dianne, what has been like for you kind of taking on this ministry and this opportunity that the internet's obviously provided you all to reach out and share your story? What has it been like for you?
I'll be honest, I'm not a natural speaker like Marcus is. So when we first started doing speaking engagements, even before he made the video and that sort of thing, it was always very nerve-wracking for me. But afterwards, getting to talk to the teens that would hear our message, hearing how our story had inspired them or helped them, has always been very humbling, and also a sign of affirmation that we do need to share our message, and that it's important, for people to hear about our struggles and how we overcame those struggles, with the grace of God. So it's been really a blessing and a great opportunity. And I do love to speak, as difficult as it is for me. And over the years, when we were before we were married, and then at the beginning of our marriage, we would do most of our speaking engagements together. And now I'm kind of on standby because we have 4 kids.
Yeah.
But it's still really, really wonderful to be able to share a message whenever we're able to.
Now, you have a video on YouTube called Worth the Wait that's got a lot of views on it. It's obviously been well trafficked, and people are very interested in the story. Talk a little bit about the story that's shared there. I mean, both of your kind of roles in that story, and then I'll ask a few kind of follow-up questions from there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to it, and I always struggle condensing this because I feel like there's so many good things to share. And anytime that you're really excited about your own life and your own story, I think that's a good thing. So. But I'll do my best to just,
I'll just get you if it gets boring.
For you.
No, I'm just kidding.
Okay, so, we, again, like I said, I had come from a place where I didn't just grow up really not knowing my faith and not being devout. I went through stages, starting in middle school, where I became very addicted to lust. I made a lot of mistakes, did a lot of really crazy things, and just found myself eventually in a very bad place. Everybody knows this, but nobody likes to really talk about this and admit that the things that we do that we know we're not supposed to do have a toll on us. And we sort of keep taking on that debt, and sometimes you find yourself at a place where you're just like, you're so overwhelmed, you don't know if you can get yourself out of that. And I was there in college, and there was a lot of things that were going on in my life. There were some financial issues that I was having, but I had made some enemies, lost friends, or just all my relationships had ended in a very bad way. Right around the time that my grandfather had gone on a retreat. There's retreats that are really popular in Texas called ACTS retreats, ACTS. And my father had gone on that same retreat a couple of years prior to that, and he'd come back really weird. Like he was saying sorry and wanted to pray
you mean
together.
Really Catholic,
yeah,
is
like
what you mean.
Just weird to me. Yeah, not a different person, but very, very much trying to be.
It had a positive impact
person.
on.
Yeah, absolutely. It sort of stuck in my heart, but it was something that I didn't really act on. But again, like as I saw him grow, I knew that there were some roots in that retreat. Well, he had been bugging his father, my grandfather, to go for years. And my grandfather, who was even less religious, he was just not an emotional man, and he worked a lot. He retired, and he was like, I don't have anything else to do. I'm super bored. So my dad kept bugging him, and he's finally like, all right, I'll go on this retreat. And he goes and comes back, and he's even weirder. He's on fire. Like he's romantic with his wife, for the first time in front of others, my grandmother. And then he tells his son, my dad, that he loves him for the first time. And so about 4 weeks after this retreat, he has a heart attack in his sleep and he dies. Wow. And so, I remember being at the hospital, and, it is a very somber kind of environment, right? Everybody's sad. I know my dad is in a lot of pain. I saw him cry for the first time ever in my life. I was 18 years old or 19 years old, something like that. And so all of this stuff is going on. I'm in a really dark place. This is, this stuff happens in my family where I'm just dealing with emotions and thinking, where am I going? You know, what does my life really mean here? You know, and I saw the change that my dad was making. I saw what happened to my grandfather, and I thought, I knew that I needed something. I knew that I couldn't get myself out of the hole that I was, in because of my own actions. And I tried a lot of things. You know, I tried in my, privacy. I tried a lot of things to change who I was that just didn't work. So I decided to sign up for a retreat in hopes that I could find maybe whatever it was that my grandfather and my, dad had found. And I found Dianne, actually.
How was that? Were you working at the retreat, or?
I was.
Sort of, yeah. Yeah. I mean, obviously, I had an encounter with God, for the first time. I really felt like God was real at this retreat. But that's really where our story starts, is that, I went on this retreat looking for something different. Most of the time I was looking for, again, a pretty girl.
Right.
And this time I was looking for a change in my life. And I saw Dianne. And I just saw in her a lot of things that I was missing, this innocence and serenity and peace, when, again, I was in the midst of chaos and just, turmoil.
Right.
And I didn't really like who I was. And I, saw her and that faith that she had, it spoke to me. And so actually at the retreat, she was like jumping and yelling and singing and stuff. But there was a lot of people there. Anyway, so yeah, I noticed just those things about her, I think because of where I was coming from. When we prayed, I mentioned this in the video, that I never felt like I got much out of prayer. I would pray and I didn't know what was happening. If I was like fishing, you don't know, you can't see in the water. You don't know if fish are close or far, like you're miles away from any fish.
Right.
And I always felt like that when I prayed, but when I saw her pray, I really felt like she had like, that red phone that was like a direct line right to God. And so I thought, okay, she's got something that I'm missing, and I really wanted it. So I got the courage to pursue her, and that's where the story starts.
So Dianne, let me ask, at that time, did you feel what he thought he was seeing in terms of your prayer life and all those kinds of
She
things?
didn't know what was going on.
Prayer life.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I thought you meant like the mutual attraction.
No, but I'm glad that you went there. But no, in terms of your own faith life, were you at a place where you felt very close to God and in a good spot?
Yeah, I was. So I went on my first Acts retreat right when I graduated from high school. And that was really what sparked the desire to pursue my faith in a deeper, more meaningful way. Mm-hmm. So after I attended that retreat, I was just, on fire, and I just felt like I wanted to learn everything and just, devote myself entirely to God. And it was shortly after that I started receiving, or that I started discerning a possible vocation to the religious life. And so I spent the first year and a half of college really learning a lot and just surrounding myself by, people that were going to be a good influence with me, the Catholic Student Association and things like that. And so when that freshman year, when I was on team for the retreat, I was just really focused on, the spiritual aspect of the retreat and, being of service to the people who were attending. So yeah, I do remember, sort of meeting Marcus, but my mind was just focused on other things.
Well, God was like forming the path, and you weren't ready to walk it yet. But.
Yeah.
So what was the next step in your all's
Oh yeah, well,
testimony?
This is where it gets kind of crazy. So I got the courage to start pursuing her, and at first, she didn't want to have anything to do with me, sort of, right, from that sense. But I was persistent, and so I kind of broke through just a bit. And then she kind of, slapped me with a couple of things that she said that I had to do if there was going to be any kind of relationship. And so those three things were that I had to ask her dad's permission, and I was like, that's easy. No big deal.
You're a very confident young man, weren't you?
Yeah. So, and then the second thing was she handed me a really huge book, that was like, I was in college at the time. I didn't really read for my college. I'm not saying that like a good thing, I'm not proud of it. I didn't really read for my college courses, and she hands me this big book, and I'm like, this is weird. Like, I've never been in a relationship where I'm getting like demands before we've even had our first date, especially a really big book, like reading.
Yeah.
That's a weird one. So, but she says you have to read this book because there's some things about me that I want you to know that you're not going to understand unless you read the book first. So I took it. I read the book because she told me that she wouldn't tell me the third thing until I finished the book.
What was the book?
It was called Arms of Love by an author named Carmen Marcoux.
Okay.
So it was a novel about a guy and a girl, guy who's an atheist, and he's kind of a womanizer, and a girl who's really sweet and pure, and the guy obviously has an attraction to her and starts to pursue her, and then the conversion that he has over the course of the book for this girl, or in pursuance of this girl, or lady or woman or whatever. She likes me to not say girl. Anyway, so it's a very powerful witness, and
so what was your reaction when she gives you these mandates? You don't even know what number 3 is yet, so you gotta ask your dad and read the book. What impression did that have on you?
Well, so before I answer that, let me tell you what the third thing is, because it doesn't really, there's no justice until you know what the third really crazy thing that she asked of me was. After she gave me the book and I read it, and I came back and told her I finished it, she said, well, the third thing is that, and she started off telling me a little bit about her past. She tells me about a specific instance of a guy that she had been dating that had hurt her and humiliated her, and it was so rough for her that evening she drove to a church and she went to adoration, and she's praying and she's crying, and she remembers this book, and she gets an idea from the book that she's going to save her next kiss for marriage. So wow. She says to me that I already made a promise to God and to Mary that the next man that I kiss will be on the altar on my wedding day, and she's like, if you want to be with me, well, you have to take on that promise too. And so that was the real shocker, asking your dad and reading a book like that was like, I don't know, take me to the movies and buy me popcorn and a bunch of candy, kind of thing. Like it's going to cost me some money, but that's not that big a deal. That third thing she asked me was really challenging, and so I did what any person would do, is I panicked and I tried to argue that as being a really bad idea. I thought just immediately I was like, wait, hold on.
This is when the sirens are going off in the background, right? Now let me ask Dianne, where did you or how long before you met Marcus did you have that experience, that really challenging experience in a previous relationship?
Gosh, it feels like so long ago. I want to say maybe between 1 and 2 years, something like that.
So over that time, did you kind of come up with this list and decide, okay, this is what I'm going to, require, or how did that come about?
Yeah, I did. It was kind of a transformation, if you will. So, I mentioned how my freshman year of college, I felt really focused on my prayer life. And I attended another retreat. I was all about retreats at the time. And on this retreat, I met another guy who I just hit it off with right away. We got along. And when the retreat ended, he wanted to start seeing me. And, in my mind, I just equated, a Catholic guy on a Catholic retreat being totally checks out everything.
Right, yeah.
And so I was pretty wrong about that. And the relationship moved pretty quickly. And I made the mistake of not expressing any, what I expected out of the relationship, any kind of boundaries or anything like that. I just assumed that he would, respect me and treat me well, because those were my standards, and I didn't know that I didn't, realize that I had to communicate that at the time. And so, so the day came when, he made it pretty clear that he wanted to take advantage of me, and I was just pretty devastated. I was shocked, I was surprised, and, luckily I left, where we were, and I was living at home at the time, so, like Marcus mentioned, I went to the chapel because I was a little bit I was not ready to fix my parents yet. And it was there when I was praying before our Lord in the Blessed Sacrament that I, in that moment, I really just felt ashamed and embarrassed, I guess. Not so much because of what I had done, but because of the situation that I had gotten myself into. And I felt so far from the person that I was trying to be, just a few weeks prior to that. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, like, God must be so ashamed of me, like, disappointed in me, like, what's wrong with you? Like, you know better. And so I felt like I needed to almost punish myself or do something to prove to God that, that I really was serious, that I really wanted to, to glorify him through my, thoughts and actions. And that's when I had remembered about the book that I had read, Arms of Love. And I guess it was an inspiration of the Holy Spirit, but the book, even though it was a novel, I was really inspired by the main character, and I wanted to be like her.
Yeah.
And in the book, she was saving her first kiss for marriage, and even though I had already had my first kiss, I don't know, I just felt very moved by that conviction, and I had always really struggled with the courage to speak up in relationships.
Yeah. And
so I felt like, okay, maybe if I just do that, just eliminate kissing altogether, it'll make it a lot easier the next time I'm in a relationship. And I felt like this will prove to God I'm doing something big. I'm giving up kissing out, to show God that I'm serious. I really want to do something. And over the next year or so, that the intention of my promise completely changed. It originally was more of something negative, a punishment, something I felt like I had to take away from myself to make amends. And over the course of the year, it slowly became apparent to me that saving my next kiss was not something that I was giving up, but rather something that I was saving as a gift. And I started to learn about the theology of the body and how good not just my kiss was, but my whole body, and that it was really something beautiful, and that kissing is all about the intention. If it's meant to communicate that you love someone, that you care about them, it can be holy, it can be innocent, and I obviously hadn't had that experience. In my experience, kissing was something very far from holy and very far from innocent, and so the intention completely changed. And that's when my promise became more of something liberating rather than something, holding me down.
Wonderful.
Are you feeling emotional?
No.
It's okay.
So, all right. So
I always feel like I wish I could feel things like she does.
So, all right. So she drops that bombshell on you. Like, what's your reaction, and what comes next after that?
Well, after some kind of one-sided debate, I tried to argue my case, but Dianne was actually really prepared. She had already, obviously, she'd thought about it. She knew what she wanted to say. She knew she was going to hit me with that. I had no idea what was coming. So anyway, after that, the funny thing is, and this is probably a good lesson to really, to young girls. Can I say girls in that case, right? To young girls or ladies who are being courted, is she actually tricked me, right? She let me like her a lot first. We became friends. She sort of kept me at a distance, and I saw a lot of her, that I had mentioned earlier, her faith and her personality, and we talked and shared stories and those kinds of things. And so I got to really liking her. And then when she asked that of me, it was kind of a dilemma for me, because I thought, well, I don't want to do that. I don't think I can do that. But, I sort of weighed my options, and I thought, having a relationship with her and not kissing sounds pretty terrible. But not having a relationship with her at all sounds actually worse. I know her, I like her a lot. There's something about her, and I just couldn't say no to her. I didn't want to say yes, but I couldn't say no. And so, anyways, if you do it right, girls, you can set up a guy like that, right? Let him see who you are really. But in all seriousness, don't be afraid to challenge them, because that's when you can tell whether a guy's really, really interested in you and what his intentions are. Like if a guy can't, his heart is sort of torn, you put him in that position. That's actually a really good thing, because it makes the guy, feel like they have to do something courageous. And for her, I couldn't see myself telling her no. And so I thought, even though I don't know how this is going to work or if it's going to fail in a couple of hours or a couple of days, I said yes, sort of reluctantly. And it was really a turning point in my life, because beforehand I said I was sort of addicted to my lust, and my desires controlled my decisions, even though sometimes I didn't want to do things that I did. She kept me at a distance, but we got to know each other. We had, sort of developed a relationship. And then I was introduced to the theology of the body through the book she gave me. And so all of these things working together started to kind of work on my heart, my mind. As I'm reading and I'm not like constantly in sin, like I'm starting to understand a little bit more about my desires and wants, and my past is coming up, and I'm going through guilt and all of this weird stuff. But I'm working through it. I started to we prayed together. I went to adoration a lot, and as I started to learn more about the theology of the body and my understanding grew, then I was able to implement a lot of that stuff in our relationship, and we had this really amazing relationship, and so I wondered, how it was going to work, us not kissing, and how do you show affection when you don't kiss somebody? And the weirdest thing happened to me. I became this crazy, stupid romantic, because like normally I was used to in relationships, you like somebody, you feel like that like or desire or love or something, and then you move very quickly to physical expressions of that desire or that affection. But I couldn't do that. And so because I couldn't do that, I was forced for the first time in my life to express affection in other ways. So I bought her flowers and I wrote her poetry. We actually were just the other day, we were cleaning out a bunch of stuff, and she pulled out all these little poems I had written to her. And I sang to her, and I washed her car randomly and stuff like that. And so I had 4 younger sisters, and I started to like who I was becoming, the example I was setting for them. I loved our relationship. I felt like I could really show affection for her. Like I wasn't, like a soda bottle just being shaken up and had with nowhere. I was actually able to, like, that affection was exploding, but it was coming out in all these beautiful ways. And I felt affection from her too. So that roller coaster of a relationship, with the ups and downs and stuff, was really a more exciting time in my life than any of the other relationships that I had where I had physical intimacy involved, And we weren't scared of physical intimacy. Like we gave tight hugs, and I kissed her on the cheek, and all of those things. Like we weren't afraid of our desires, but we were able to sort of channel them in a way that really expressed a great affection and desire. And everybody else saw it too, like all of Diane's friends and all the girls, that would come up to her and be like, "Man, I wish my boyfriend would do those kinds of things." And the guys would come up to me and be like, "Dude, cut it out." I don't hear the end of it, right?
So what he's describing though is really what you wanted and you deserved, was for your dignity to be respected. And Humanae Vitae, which is the reason we've been recording some of these podcasts and these things, is it's for the 50th anniversary of Humanae Vitae, is that is taught within this, that love is an expression way beyond physical, that it begins in this other form, and then it becomes that in a sacrament, that's where the sacrament leads, is to this physical expression that brings life and all those kinds of things. What he was experiencing internally is really what you deserved, but you were hoping he would find. How was that as you saw it kind of develop and it was working out? He wasn't sure it was going to work out. You knew it was going to work out because you were going to hold to your guns, but what were your feelings and what were you kind of experiencing through that time?
Well, I think it was this just the desire that we're all born with, that we're all created with, this desire to be loved, to be appreciated and respected. And I had already been through not just that one relationship, but other relationships where I hadn't received that. I always felt like I needed to be in a relationship to feel loved and appreciated. And yet when I would get into a relationship, I was like, okay, so where are the feelings? Like, where I'm not being like fulfilled in any way, and I was always felt, very disappointed or just unsure of what was going on. And so even when Marcus said yes, that he would, he agreed to my standards, I still didn't know like what was going to happen. I think I was still like such a newbie in my understanding of theology of the body and the way that we're created and how God designed us to love and be loved. But we really discovered it together through our relationship. Like he said, that even though we were both committed and we both had very pure intentions for our relationship, it was still hard. There were still times when there was temptation and we would question or, talk about like, how to move forward. But, it always came down to what it was that we wanted for the other. And obviously it's heaven.
Yeah.
And so that I don't know, it was just really beautiful the way it unfolded in our relationship, and learning together, and discovering our purpose and the way that we were made to be. It just solidified, our desire to continue on that path. And also, like he said, the way that we inspired other people, we had no idea. Like, I made that promise for myself.
Yeah.
I gave him that promise for us as a couple. And then over time, we saw how it inspired, and other people were just, moved by our conviction to save ourselves as a gift for the other during, when we became married.
So throughout that time, you're discerning each other, and you're discerning, is this the person I'm called to? And you are also discerning, am I called to marriage at all? So you actually broke up at one point, is that right?
Yeah.
As part of your discernment. Talk a little bit about that, and then what you felt is the calling that kind of drew you back to marriage and to Marcus.
I guess when I was a young adult, and really, I mentioned that I was a cradle Catholic, but it wasn't until, I was a teenager, young adult that I really started to unfold the beauty of our Catholic faith. And I was just so excited about everything that I was learning, and I was so inspired also by other people that I came to know who had very deep faiths, that I just felt like I needed all of it. Like, I wanted all of it. Mm-hmm. And I think at one point I felt like the only way to really get as deep as I possibly could in this life was by entering, religious order. And so I explored that. I became friends with a few sisters in different orders, and I attended some retreats, and all of those were just, really beautiful experiences. And but I never felt like 100% like this is where God is calling me to. There were times when I felt deeply called to it, and there were other times that I said, oh, but marriage and children and all the beauty that's there. And so it was back and forth, and which I think is normal during discernment. But it was, during our relationship, I went to World Youth Day in Sydney, Australia. So, I mean, come on, like all the events there and the adoration and just the massive amounts of religious order,
right.
People being there.
You're all amped up on Jesus.
Yes. I mean, I'm surprised. I don't know. I'm sure there's a ton of people that, feel called to religious life just by going on to World Youth Day. So, I came back and again, I was, on fire all over again. And I started, reconsidering, thinking like maybe this is where God is calling me, and so I asked him if we could kind of take a break so I could really focus and pray about it, discern, and even when we decided to continue our relationship, there were still like moments of doubt, not being completely sure, but I do remember it was when we were meeting with a very close friend, a priest, who eventually witnessed our marriage. And I remember talking to him and telling him like my struggles and like, I don't know, like I love Marcus, I really do. But then sometimes like I still just feel the struggle. And, he told me like, you have to choose at one point, and trust that God is calling you to the right vocation and that he's going to stop you if that's not the right one. But I remember him also suggesting like to implement some of the things that I felt really drawn to about religious communities, to try to implement those, in our relationship. And he was right. Some of the things that I love most about religious communities was, the prayer life, and the community life. And obviously
That's true. She's like the Mother Superior at home.
Mother Superior.
It makes sense now.
It looks different, but those things are still very much, important in marriage and family life. I mean, we still have to make prayer, priority and important in our, in our family. And there's definitely community in our family. So,
yeah. So we're recording this around the topic of Humanae Vitae. So you have this these mandates. You live this relationship of devotion and chastity, and you fulfill that all the way up to your wedding. So after you're married, talk about how theology of the body and some of the principles of Humanae Vitae have really helped your marriage and kind of informed you all spiritually after you were married.
Yeah. Well, I mean, let me say that we weren't perfect, and I was very far from perfect, and I made a lot of mistakes during our relationship.
Right.
We made mistakes, and so there it wasn't always like an easy street kind of thing. But regardless, I think part of what you're asking actually starts at around the time that we started dating, and I started to learn about the theology of the body, and the changes that I mentioned that happened inside me that really changed who I was and a lot of who I was trying to be. And I very honestly, when I was in middle school and high school, I thought that there was something was wrong with me. By the time I got to college, I knew there was something wrong with me. I felt like everybody was living a lifestyle that you see on movies and you hear about and these popular rap artists and stuff, and nobody else is struggling with it. But I had a horrible, intense struggle. I felt like my desires were so strong that if I tapped on the gas, I would crash right into the wall, at high speeds. I couldn't control it, and it really had control over me. And so, I felt like that's what got me into a lot of trouble, is just this really intense appetite. I was so hungry and I couldn't eat enough. I go to buffets and I just couldn't. And so when I met Dianne and I started to kind of get into my newfound Catholic faith, the first thing I want to do is rid all the ugliness out of my life. This happens a lot of times when people are going through an intense diet or something. It's like McDonald's is now the devil. I'll never have McDonald's again in my life. And if anybody mentions McDonald's, I'm going to punch you in the face.
Right.
I was very much like that. I had this just this great suspicion and almost like a hatred for the desires that got me into so much trouble. And it was learning more about the theology of the body that started to help me to realize that those desires were good, and not only just good, so good that they were meant to point us, to this great symbolism of the truth of God, who is a family, that the love of God and that desire to be physically intimate with another, that desire for touch and intimacy and affection is like a pulling, it's like, for me, it was like a gravity, can't avoid it. It's a pulling towards that call to be fruitful and multiply, to love greatly and to experience love and to allow that exchange of love to produce new life,
Right.
And so when I realized that, that this theology of the body taught that, the relationship of the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit is this familial love, this exchange of it's the eternal exchange of love that's so powerful, that three persons but one family, one God. I started to realize that this desire I had for Dianne and for union was a desire to be a part of that family, that same type of exchange of love. And you can see now that with 4 kids, obviously, we have a very strong pull towards that, and God has somehow found it fit to make more of us. But I realized that, it wasn't there was something wrong with me. It was just I was pointed in the wrong direction, just like with a powerful Ferrari. It's awesome as long as you're up on the open road and hitting 200 miles an hour. But if you're going towards a brick wall, obviously the results are going to be disastrous. And so, that was key for me, not seeing my desires as something that needed to be spanked or cut or killed kind of thing, but really channeled in a beautiful way. Moved from our relationship and into our marriage, and when we first got married, we were like, well, shoot, we haven't kissed for 3.5 years, we're not gonna wait to have a baby, whatever God does, it's up to, we weren't trying to have a baby, we just said we're gonna be open, whatever, and then immediately, God was like, well, you got it, and we did that for the second baby, and He gave us one right away, and then we're like, okay, we'll take at least a year and a half, and obviously, He's just keeps giving us sweet kids. But the point is that that's been a big part of our relationship, is that, those desires, not trying to stifle them, trying to channel them. Even when you feel like it may not be a good time to have a baby right now, that doesn't mean that our desires get stifled, right? This means that I have to find new ways to express that affection for her. I have to, I planted roses in our, front yard for her instead of buying them because they're kind of expensive. No, I'm kidding. But yeah, no, I mean, finding ways like that, not just even in marriage, limiting yourself to physical expressions of intimacy and desire, but allowing yourself to explore that and being open to the fact that those desires are supposed to lead you to really, really amazing things. And I think part of those, sexual desires are not just, about having children, but the powerful call of being husband and father, to my children allows me to do those things in a very powerful way. You know, like I think being open to children makes me a better husband and also a better father, you know, because being open to sacrifice, being open to demands placed on me from somebody else, you know, means that I have to be willing to change diapers. You know, I have to be willing to let Dianne go out of town for a couple of days and leave me with the kids. Like, I have to be willing to essentially, you know, take on extra weight that I'm not normally used to carrying. And if I'm not open to that, if I'm constantly worried about the extra weight that I might be handed, then I'm not going to be prepared when it does get handed to me. So
yeah, and the sacrifices that you all made in your dating relationship just translate into different sacrifices you have to make when you're married. It's not like self-sacrifice ends at the altar in marriage. It kind of begins then, right? I mean, there's a lot of sacrifice that's involved. Did you kind of see, Dianne, some of that translate, that the focus you all were able to have in the working as a team toward a common goal, that really benefited you all after you were married?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the reason that we were trying to remain chaste was not, for selfish reasons or, self-serving purposes. It was for the good of the other. And so that, that continues, into marriage too, even when even before the baby comes, even just during pregnancy, that's very much a sacrifice. And, Marcus does such a great job of helping me and taking care of me through that. And then, when the babies are born, it's, motherhood is an eternal sacrifice. And it's, it's amazing because we have learned so much about God through parenthood. We've learned so not just, about sacrifice, but about, mercy and, unconditional love. There's just so many things that we have learned through our being open to, to sacrifice.
So where can people learn more? Repeat the website that you had mentioned before.
Thirstingfortruth.com.
Thirstingfortruth.com. And do you all have any social media accounts associated with your ministry, or?
I do. Yeah, there's a Facebook account. I'm not good at it, honestly. I mean, I'm really bad about those things.
So to learn more, you want people to go to the website?
Yeah, it's probably the easiest way. Yeah.
Very good. Well, Marcus, Dianne, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your story.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having us.
My pleasure.